The world is facing a make-or-break opportunity to get climate action on track and to make this the decade of implementation. But how much progress was made at COP27 in Egypt? And are the goals set out in the Paris Agreement still within reach? Join us for the inside perspectives as the race to zero accelerates. What next after COP27? What are the priorities here and now? How can Swedish companies accelerate globally? The alarm bells are ringing loud and clear. According to the latest IPCC report, the window for keeping global warming below 1.5 degrees is rapidly closing. At COP27, a landmark agreement was reached on a loss and damages fund to help vulnerable countries adapt. But renewed pledges to reduce carbon emissions were absent, leaving many frustrated. So how can Swedish innovators and policymakers align the solutions and technologies that already exist with critical near-term targets for climate action? Professor Hassler, your research in economics spans everything from public finance and social mobility to climate change. And it is not news that climate change is affecting every region of the globe. The UN chief António Guterres gave a stark warning that we're on a highway to climate hell. And science is telling us that we have only 8 years to cut emissions in half. What is your view on the outcome of COP27 in Egypt? And are we closer to establishing the financial and political frameworks needed to achieve net zero by 2050?
I don't think that we did much progress in Egypt. And I think that's due to the focus. And the focus has been on establishing a system for compensating poor countries and countries that haven't caused so much emissions so far, to compensating them for the damages that we have incurred due to our emissions. And I think that's actually a focus that makes me a little bit worried. I would have liked to see much more of a focus on the area where we actually have a common interest, where there is a possibility of a win-win situation, and that is mitigation. That should be the focus. Establishing who is responsible for the damages that already we see and that will happen in the future, I don't think that's a win-win situation. And even though I think that it's necessary to discuss these issues, I would have liked to see them on a separate track. So focus the international climate negotiations on mitigation.
Okay, and you've talked about the two different tracks, and we had the carbon tax, and that's been in place for 30 years. How effective has this policy been, and what other policy tools and economic instruments should we be giving priority to now?
Well, there is no doubt that it cannot continue to be free to emit CO2 into the atmosphere. And the way I think of it is that we know from science that there is a certain amount of CO2 that we can emit from now and onwards without having unacceptable climate change. And one could see that so-called carbon budget as a natural resource in scarce supply. And we know from history that if we have a natural resource in scarce supply, it cannot be up for grabs for everyone to use how much ever they want, free of charge. So we need to stop that. And there are two ways of doing it. One is a fee or a tax. I don't like the word tax because I think it's rather that you have to pay a price for using this natural resource. The atmosphere's limited capacity to absorb CO2. That must be priced. So there's one way of solving the problem. And one is a fee or a tax. The other is an emission trading system. And I think actually there are strong arguments for using emission trading systems instead, like we are doing in EU. With them, you can be sure that you are not going to emit more than what is reasonable. And now the proposal from the EU Commission is to set those targets. And these are not just targets, they are actual sharp restrictions on how much emissions we are going to do until we become climate neutral. And the level of these limits are such that if everyone does what we do, we are actually going to stay at least very close to 1.5 degrees of warming. So that's the way forward, I think.
What is do we have a figure? Do we understand how much it's going to cost to transition to a net zero economy?
It depends a little bit what you mean by cost. If you talk about costs as kind of lost growth, lost GDP, I would say that the best approximate figure is zero. It's not going to have any impact on the growth of the longer run. And actually there I would say research is pretty clear that if you do this in the right way with a price or an emission trading system, it's not going to have growth consequences. We need to do investments, of course, and in particular, we need to change the way that we produce energy, and there the calculation is that the investment rate, so how much of our income that we spend on investments, needs to go up by approximately 2 percentage points. So in the world as a total, around 25% of our income is spent on investments. It's been a little bit lower in recent decades, and it has to go up by 2 percentage points to a level where it actually was in the 90s and zeros and so on. So it's not that we have to increase investments very much, but these 2 percentage points of our income that the investment rate needs to increase by, that has to go to green infrastructure, typically in energy production. So if you call that the cost, it's 2% of GDP, but it's not really a cost because it's an investment that actually produces a good return.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for your time, and let's hope that change and milestones are achievable. Thank you, Professor Hassler.
Thank you.
Policy change is clearly slow-moving, but Swedish companies are not wasting any time implementing disruptive solutions around the world. And 20 of these pioneering companies joined the Swedish pavilion at COP27. Now, we are joined by 3 of those game-changing Swedish companies. Per. Ragn-Sells are committed to realising the vision of a circular economy with solutions to use waste as a resource. And estimates from sources like the Circularity Gap report indicate that this transition alone could reduce global emissions by as much as 39%. After the negotiations at COP27, what policy actions do you see are urgently needed to reduce the carbon footprint of industrial materials such as steel, plastics, aluminium and cement?
Thank you, Sarah, for a very intelligent question. I would say that when it comes to the steel and the aluminium, a lot of things are already happening. At the same time, the values of material are very high. So there's a huge interest also to make sure that we keep them in circulation. When it comes to plastic and cement, there's a different ballgame. When it comes to plastics, we have the potential really to then replace a lot of the fossil fuels, of the oil that we're using. But only 9% of the plastics are today recycled. And we tend to focus on what's already are in circulation in our new processes. So here we need to make sure that we're focusing on the 91% that are not recycled. When it comes to cement, I would say that we need to change the process. We need to understand that we can use other materials than limestone. Because if we then replace our energy production in our cement kilns, we still have 50% of emissions left from the limestone that we need to mine. So new processes are available, new techniques are there. And here policymakers, of course, we need to support the electrification, but at the same time enable also new ways of producing cement in the future.
And we've heard this catchphrase that the linear economy is dead, yet only 8.9% of the current global economy is circular. How can Swedish companies and policymakers enable faster scale-up of circular business models to enable carbon emission reductions?
For the first, I must say that the linear economy is not dead. It's very much living. And that has created our economical growth. Our living standards are based on that we have used fossil fuels and we have been able to take up elements from the ground. We need to change perspective here. Today, when we are thinking about waste, we see this 4 tons, and this is the amount of waste that we're wasting in Sweden per capita. 500 kilos are the household waste, and 3.5 tons are the waste from how we are constructing our roadblocks, our roads, the municipality waste and the waste from industries. In here, policymakers say, we would like to minimize this. What happened in real case is that we are putting in different kind of non-needed constructions, landscaping. Instead, the focus should be how can we replace as much as possible of the resources that we are digging up from the ground. And here, in order to produce our GDP, we need to mine each year 60 tons of resources. But today policies say, avoid the waste, and I would like to have it said, saying that you should replace as much as possible of the virgin production. So policymakers, we have not waste anymore, we just have resources.
Amazing. Katarina, Deconomy are leveraging data monitoring and transparency as a key tool in the green transition. But historically, data transparency has been one of the many roadblocks to making sure that funding and investments go towards meaningful climate action. What is Deconomy doing to address this problem?
Well, Deconomy works mainly with what we say democratizing climate action. And what does that mean? It means that we use data and we use calculations to provide the many with carbon footprint data on their actions. And why is that? Well, despite all the research that we have on climate change, we still see that the main barrier to make things happen is awareness. And we think that data plays a huge role in that if you can measure your emissions based on your behavior and actions, either you're a consumer, a citizen, or a corporate, and if you then get help to understand what is this, where are my hotspots, and what can I do about it, then you can create kind of climate literacy, as we call it, and that will probably enforce action and also put investments in the right places. Either it's in your home or in your company or in your nation.
Okay, and who would you say needs this form of data monitoring the most as a motivator for taking action? Is it civil society, government, individuals, or industry?
I would say both, or all of them, all three of them. We work with digital products, so we serve both the consumer and civil society with carbon footprints, but also nations with visualizing the real-time data emissions to understand what are our emissions right now and how does those measure against the 2030 target, for example. But also corporates need to know their baseline and where the hotspots are in the supply chain to be able to understand what is this and how can we approach this problem, probably together with the business ecosystem, with suppliers, maybe with consumers as well, and to create solutions for that. When it comes to civil society, I think it's very much about addressing the needs of vulnerable communities or people that don't have a voice in corporates or in government. And to do that, you need also the data and to understand the data. It's like, weather forecast most people understand today. I wish that we could be as good in understanding emissions data and what to do about it.
And do you see that as a tool that could work across industries to help industries work together to reduce their emissions?
Absolutely. Even though there might be different sources and different granularities in data, we still need collaboration between industries and between sectors. I think that is really a place where policy, where industries, where government, where civil society needs to work together to find the solutions and to understand where are the big gaps, how do we come up from our silos and see the full business model or solution model, if you will, to address what we need to do.
It's clear data is a critical tool in the green transition, and so is innovation, not least in the energy sector. Now we're going to cross to Martin. Minesto has a unique solution for capturing reliable ocean energy, and you use the COP27 platform to highlight the success of using this to enable the Faroe Islands to become 100% renewable. Can you tell us about your vision for scaling this technology?
it's really a matter of scaling up to gigawatt scale in several markets, and Southeast Asia is the largest market for us, where our solution can be, even in some markets, the main renewable energy source actually. But the Faroe case is the immediate build out.
And how do you see that being scaled up?
Well, in two ways. We're building larger machines. So the machines we have now producing electricity, they are 5 meter in wingspan, and we're going for 12 meter wings, and that will give us megawatt scale machines. And the other one is, of course, to build parks where you multiply the units in seabed areas to get hundreds of megawatts of capacity for distribution to shore.
Okay, and from the perspective of public policy and economic initiatives, what are the gaps and barriers that need to be addressed?
One obvious challenge for all new technologies, ours as well, is of course that the cost level when you start your first tier of build out is more costly than in a longer term perspective. So finding ways of subsidizing and supporting the build up is important, especially if we're running out of time, which we are when it comes to the climate change. So in order to speed up the build out, we need to work with different sources of funding to make the business cases attractive from day one.
Okay, and which innovation policies do you think will be most effective going forward?
I think that what we see in markets such as Taiwan, the UK, Canada, France, and a few more places where you target price subsidies, I think that's the best type of carrot you can have. It will protect the taxpayers. If the new technologies don't deliver, then they don't get any subsidies. And it's also attractive from the investor's perspective, where they can see the business case of a project, a 10 megawatt project, a 30 megawatt project, come together nicely with levels that are acceptable from an ROE perspective. So I think that's the key one. The other area, obviously, is related to environmental permitting and that sector, where we have new technologies introduced in new ecosystems. We need to balance sort of the global climate effects with potential risks locally, and it would be really good if the results we have in one part of the world could be duplicated in the next one, so we don't have to do it again and again and again.
Okay, thank you, Martin, for joining us for those words. Per, do you agree with Martin's assessment of the steps needed to scale up climate smart solutions?
I totally agree that policymakers need to understand the potential, and at COP27 we showcased 4 different processes that all of them need to have a new way of acting from policymakers. The first one is that we have a project in Estonia where we will use carbon dioxide in order to produce precipitated calcium carbonate, meaning that we can replace limestone, digging up limestone from the bedrock. But the problem here is we have a hard time to get access to carbon dioxide, because today's policies don't promote carbon capture, usage, and what we also will do, storage at the same time. The second one is how we can convert today's wastewater treatment plant into becoming resource plants. And we have the potential to produce phosphorus and nitrogen from the wastewater treatment plants. But again, if we extract the phosphorus, we're not allowed to use it, because today policies are dependent on origin and not quality. So even if we can produce the highest quality of phosphorus you can find in the world, we're not allowed to put it on the market, not in Europe anyhow. And this last one I would like to say, and this is really a game changer, and that's how we can collect now fish sludge or fish pop from the fish farms. And what will happen then is that when you're producing fish, you'll be allowed to then, if you collect the fish sludge, you will avoid eutrophication. So it means that you can then produce more fish. And it's already up and running in Norway. But here again, policymakers need to push for this one, and then there can be a game changer. We can produce a huge amount of energy, but also produce phosphorus and the nitrogen. And here again, policymakers just press the button and we are ready.
Now, we have talked a lot about policy and innovations. How do we bridge that gap between the policymakers and the innovative companies? Katarina?
I think what we did, or what you did, and what we did together at COP is one way. We need to meet, and we need to find new meeting places, and need to collaborate much more. I think there is a need to actually also understand, from my personal point of view, the new market, the new economy that is coming for politicians and for policymakers. To give an example, in Stockholm, we have the globe's most advanced climate data tech companies, the most best quality, the most with the global market. That's a huge a source of both economy and export, and also part of solutions in business ecosystems. I'm not sure that our politicians in Sweden sees and understands the economies and the businesses coming up. And I also think that we need to collaborate to go back in the different sectors, not only politicians, policymakers, but also invite civil society and in old incumbent industries and the new economies, new businesses, to see how can we make solutions together, what can we create in a business ecosystem.
And Per, from an industry perspective, what would you like to see to bridge that gap?
I would say that IPCC's report from April this year also was very clear. They said that the only way for the industry to be able to contribute to the Paris Agreement is to create circular material flows.
And Katarina, this COP was held in Africa, a continent that, while facing many sustainability challenges, has also seen major technology leaps in the last decade. How can data support emerging markets to drive investments in clean energy and sustainable development?
I think, both the data available should be used in better ways, going back to standards, etc., but also to increase the amount of data, the granularity of data, the quality when it comes to granularity, and also if it's up to date. We, in many times, very old data, 10 years or older, is used, and that it's not enough to create those solutions and analysis that we need to understand where are the hotspots, where we should invest in emerging countries as Africa, for example, and where the hotspots are both to create impact for adaptation or mitigate emissions. And I think one problem is that the data there is a lack of data, so we need more, and we need it digitized. So there is a twin transition that we need in many emerging countries. Some of them have the digital infrastructure, but some places we need a twin transition, climate and digital inclusion.
Emma, I'd like to bring you in now. Sweden has a strong reputation for its climate smart solutions that can transform key industries, but as our guests have pointed out, that's not enough. So how is Sweden pushing for policies that can move the world from dialogue to action?
Well, I think that is exactly what we've been showcasing here, that we've seen also the shift from actually climate scientists, governments and academia and civil society pushing for policies. But the shift is now we're seeing the private sector pushing for even more ambitious policies and regulations, because it's crystal clear that science is proving that the innovations exist for us to actually reach the targets. But we fail to scale because of lack of regulations and policies. And I think also that was so clear during COP27, and the companies that we brought with us was that you are not only there to showcase the innovative solutions that you have in place and saying that you're ready to do your part, but also to push the policymakers to do even more. And it was crystal clear that you were demanding a tax on carbon and to phase out fossil subsidies or regulations to measure and report emissions. And I think that is also such an important message to the policymakers. But we have not always had a private sector pushing for these kind of policies. I mean, the Professor Hassler was mentioning this earlier. It started off by Sweden putting political incentives that helped the Swedish companies to transform. They needed to innovate more resource efficient and more sustainable. And today we have one of the most leading private sectors in the world that do not only then have solutions in place, but also pushing the climate agenda. So with that, we do not only export actually innovations, but also policies that we have tested and tried in Sweden. And also we haven't really sacrificed that much either, in terms of we've actually reduced our emissions since the early 90s with 33%, while we're growing the economy.
Thank you, Emma, for those insights. It's clear that Sweden has the innovations, the policy, the data, and the finance to help the green transition, and Sweden's punching well above its weight. Let's hope that change can happen. I'd like to thank all of my guests today. Thank you to Per, Katarina, John, and Martin, and thank you for watching.